expansion. One more thing on recessions. What about the yield curve? Okay, a lot of hysteria about the yield curve inverting. A lot of it. It's like, especially in the financial press. My reaction is, give me a break. First of all, this is old news in the sense that the long bond yield has already gone up. And so it's the yield curve, depending on where you draw the line in terms of where you have the short end, is not inverted now. It was maybe earlier. You need a sustained inversion for there to be any signal of a recession. But even at that, it's an odd kind of predictor. It's true, it's predicted, it has predicted eight of the last 9 recessions. Okay, so a yield curve inversion has occurred during 8 or prior to 8 of the 9 last recessions with a lead time of 6 months to 12 months. Now, that's not very helpful, is it? I mean, sorry, but it's not. For a forecaster like me, that's not terribly useful. But much more important point here is that for 3 reasons, the predictive power of the yield curve now is much less than it was before. What are those 3 reasons? The first is the Fed's balance sheet. Fed's holding, what is it, $3 trillion in government and various kinds of government-related securities. That depresses the long end of the yield curve. Without that, estimates are that the long bond yield would be 50 basis points higher. Second, in this environment right now, with yields negative outside the US, long and short, by the way, negative outside the US, there's a hunt for yield. And the global savings glut, as it's sometimes been called, a lot of it's coming to the US. And that pulls down the long end of the yield curve. That's not because there's a recession imminent, it's just because people are flying to safety. And the last one, which is very interesting, is if you look at the term, what's called the term premium. Some of you are familiar with that term, but basically means the premium that investors want to get on their returns for holding a longer lived asset rather than a shorter term one. That term premium has been falling for the last 20 years. A lot of that having to do with the fact that we've squeezed inflation out of the system. So what's the bottom line here? Bottom line here is the yield curve is much shallower now than it's been in prior periods. So it's flattened out quite a bit, not because of any recession, but because of all these structural factors that are out there. And the yield curve now is more likely to invert without signaling a recession. So I think you just kind of keep that in mind as the next time there's another hysterical reaction because the yield curve's inverted. And again, another point here, this is not just a US phenomenon. It's a global phenomenon. If you look at Germany or Japan, their yield curves are also inverted or flat. But interestingly, now there, while we have positive interest rates at the short end, the long end of the yield curve, there, both in Japan and Germany, interest rates are negative, short-term, negative long-term. Very strange, very upside-down world that we're dealing with here, okay? But that's certainly part of the reason why a lot of investors come to the US.
This is something that we ask all our guests. If you could give Nariman Behravesh, first job, fresh out of graduate school, a piece of advice, knowing what you know now, what would that piece of advice be?
Oh, that's a good question. Can I just think about that?
Take your time, please. We'll wait for you.
Yeah. Gosh, I'd have to. I mean, it's a very good question. Yeah, all right, I think I can answer that. I'll try to answer. I think what I would say is that don't underestimate the importance of institutions. As graduate students, we're taught about numbers, about data, about models, but institutions matter and matter a lot. And one thing that's very clear is that countries with strong institutions typically do better than countries with weak institutions. And so I would say pay attention to the institutional framework and the institutional context in which the economy is operating.